You're listening to the Radio Wammo Breakfast, only on Kiwi.
Well, it's time now on the show to celebrate lawbreakers and mischief makers, 50 notorious New Zealanders. It's the new book by Bronwyn and Bronwyn joins us in the Kiwi FM studio this morning. Good morning to you, Bronwyn.
Good morning.
Celebrating notorious New Zealanders, bad people, mischief makers.
Yeah.
The outcasts of society.
Pretty much, yeah. It was interesting, actually. We went in sort of, with this very broad concept to write a book about notorious New Zealanders, and we came up with the magic number of 50.
Yeah.
And of course, we went in knowing that we would be covering the likes of Minnie Dean and Stanley Graham and David Gray, the really dark tales. But it was when we started to explore the more obscure stories that I think the magic really started to come out. There are we have had some bizarre petty crims in New Zealand,
Society just sort of breeds them, don't they? They pop up all over the place.
And I think especially, the early colonial New Zealand society bred a few really eccentric ones. And I think New Zealand became a sort of a draw card for people from all over the world. And, in those early days, who needed to escape, usually because the law was closing in on them. So we got some really interesting criminals.
Is it also because New Zealand's so small, our population's so small, that these people end up becoming sort of celebrities in their own time?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you still see that today, don't you, with small-time crims who make big headlines. But, back in the, 1800s when you got there was a Taranaki highwayman. I don't know if you heard about him, but fantastic story about this guy who started terrorising New Plymouth in the 1890s, dressed in an antique army uniform, complete with plumed hat,
right,
and white gloves, and was. People were very, very scared, but he was also a figure of ridicule because he would accost someone on the highway and take a couple of shillings from them.
You wouldn't know whether to laugh at him or be really, really freaked out.
Exactly. I think people were going either way, and one journalist said at the time that he was putting the good name of the highwayman to shame because his takings were so small. There was one very typical incident where he stormed into a pub on closing time in New Plymouth, and dressed up in his pretty much fancy dress outfit, and with his gun, and end of the day the till is brimming with money. And he takes the tip jar, and that was absolutely classic. He never actually got anything out of his escapades. And
it sounded like he was a reluctant criminal in some way.
He was a fantasist, and he would what he would do he'd ride into town and terrorise the place, then duck out of town, take off his costume, come back in and soak up the excitement, and escort young ladies home safely, And his undoing was when he walked into a pub one night and there were two likely lads there, about 19, who presumably were fairly tanked, who tackled him and revealed him to be, I think he was 17, and basically just a Dick Turpin fantasist,
right.
A young carpenter, and who spent the rest of his life regretting his actions.
And researching some of these stories, and particularly the one you've just told us about, are these still fresh in people's memories? I mean, are they passed down, or are they completely lost? You actually had to dig through some archives.
A bit of both, really. That was one that I hadn't heard much of. I think people in Taranaki probably still talk about it, but obviously Minnie Dean, is just such a legend. That her legend has really eclipsed her crime.
Wasn't there some more recent sort of revelations about her, or has the story about her changed in any way over time?
She's been back in the headlines in the last couple of years when a gravestone appeared on her previous. Her grave had been unmarked for a century,
right? And
a gravestone mysteriously appeared there, and then the family got together and actually put one up. But there is, there's still. She's a very controversial figure. My mother thinks she's just totally misunderstood, that she just, these babies died in her care from natural causes, and she was just scapegoated. But then there's also the argument, how she claimed that a newborn baby rolled off a seat, and that's how it died. But newborn babies don't roll.
No.
So there's certainly big gaps in her story.
Isn't that the problem? The mists of time, where the legend almost becomes larger than life, and we things can turn around, and that we start celebrating what are notoriously difficult and awful people.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is how I did a lot of my research by going back to the newspapers of the time, which are obviously a good gauge of the public opinion of the time. And some of I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but I know that some of the notorious people who we had an idea that we would cover, when I went back and actually read this story, it didn't really stack up. I mean, it just wasn't a very interesting story, and the legend had outgrown it, really.
What about Sidney Gordon Ross?
Oh, he was brilliant. Had you heard of him?
No, do tell us.
Yeah, he was. This is in 1942. He's a petty criminal, gets released from jail, and pretty much walks straight into the office of Bob Semple, who's the then Minister of Public Works.
Yeah.
And with this fantastic talent, I mean fantastic in sort of the old-fashioned definition of the term, where completely unbelievable tale, of being approached at Te Awamutu railway station by a shadowy figure who tried to recruit him for his underground network of Nazi sympathisers, and came up with this great tale of how a dozen Germans had sneaked into the country aboard a U-boat and were currently hiding out in Rotorua, about to unleash this campaign of terror on the country and blow up railway lines and bridges in the Central North Island, and send a crack team of German assassins into Wellington to take out key public figures, including Semple.
Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but what this guy didn't, what this petty crim didn't know, was that Semple had been for days getting all these reports of similar conspiracies. So it was just incredible timing. So Semple drags him into the Prime Minister's office, Peter Fraser. Fraser rings up the head of what was then the Security Intelligence Bureau, who was a very ambitious former British Army intel officer, and who has this ridiculous idea of sending this petty crim undercover. I don't know why undercover, because obviously the gang already knew who he was. Yeah. Down to Rotorua, putting him up in this fantastic hotel, giving him a car and a wad of cash and a ration book, in the time that all of these things were hard to come by. And the guy spent 3 months having the time of his life, filing these bogus reports, which this Security Intelligence Bureau guy was in turn filing to the government with increasing sort of
urgency, no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just got so out of hand that in the end the crim sort of willingly confessed to police, because he turns out that he basically ended up being used as a pawn by this intel officer who had his own ambitions of pretty much taking over the country. And he didn't. The petty crim didn't get charged. The intel guy got dispatched and disgraced back to England, where he became a carpet salesman or something for the rest of his life.
Bronwyn, just before we go, can you tell us about George Wilder? Because there's a connection here with Howard Morrison and the Howard Morrison Quartet.
Yeah. Well, George Wilder was a three-time prison escapee in the 1960s. Another petty crim who I think was sent down for 4 years and ended up serving something more like 10 or 15 because he kept escaping from jail. Twice from Mount Eden. We're talking knotted sheets here, really, brilliant ruses. And he, at one stage, he jumped aboard a moving goods train, and and stolen cars all over the place, broken into batches.
Can only happen in a certain time, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Couldn't happen these days.
He, I think our parents' generation probably were captivated by him and his exploits. He was seen as fairly harmless sort of a bloke. He didn't, it was property crime. And I think people were pretty proud if he stole their car. Because, part of the legend. But the Howard Morrison Quartet immortalised him in a folk song. I think it was George the Wilder Boy or something like that.
And that's happened even more recently, haven't there, with a folk artist down in Canterbury, about the guy who was on the loose down in South Canterbury very recently as well. So that kind of that tradition of making music about crims is still there.
Yeah. Well, it's such good stories. So good stories probably lend themselves to good folk songs, don't they?
Well, that's just a few of the stories that are contained inside the new book, Lawbreakers, Mischief Makers, 50 Notorious New Zealanders, out now by Bronwyn Sell. Bronwyn, thanks so much for coming on in and telling us about just some of them.
Cool.
Cheers.
No worries.